Well, a while back, I was going to do a 30,000 mile review. I think I took a picture of it somewhere as it turned 30,000. And now I am pretty much as usual running late. But let's talk about the DR. Welcome to the California desert. Some of you have followed me in the past and know that I started this trip out on my little Royal Enfield Himalayan I called Daisy, and we put 16,500 miles on that bike, which I just adore that bike. I still do. But there is a necessity at times to go faster than the 65 downhill with the tailwind that the Himalaya did. It had a lot of really strong points in that you really didn't have to feather the clutch or anything else. The torque off the bottom was great. It made a lot of off-road stuff really, really easy. Not in the hands of a more capable rider. They would do something with more power and probably better gearing. But for me or somebody else not that off-road experienced, it was a great little motorcycle. So I had a tough time giving it up. But for safety, I switched over to the DR650. It's a well-proven motorcycle. It's been around a long time. I bought it at 5,000 miles, actually 5,008, and bought it in January of this year, but I didn't leave until March. We were in Florida and doing a lot of rehab work and, getting the bike set up. It was pretty bare bones. The former owner had done all the regular mods to it that a lot of people seem to do, so I can't really speak to the improvement on that, but it was quite a bit different motorcycle than the Himalayan. Throughout this, I'm going to talk some about the Himalayan as far as comparison goes, probably the KLR as well, because those are really the only ones that are kind of in the same category. Kind of preference for the Gen 1 KLRs for their simplicity. And frankly, the only problem I ever had on the Himalayan was due to the fuel pump, which was needed because of fuel injection. And I just feel like, while fuel injection is really incredible, it's certainly better for mileage and everything else, it does leave a weak spot, and it leaves a potential for getting yourself stranded, which it did, which cost me a fair amount to truck the bike and etc. This bike, since March to it's now November, so April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, it's 8 months now. I have put an additional, 30,500 on it, and I've had no problem, nothing to address at all. I do carry some spares for some common known issues, but I haven't had anything that's broken me down at all. So that says a lot for it. In fact, this 30,000 mile review isn't much on a DR. I have run into people that have well over 100,000 on them, so or in that area. I know one friend that did have a problem with the bottom end, did about 80,000 miles, and that does seem to be something to consider. But other than that, it's been an excellent bike. So what I'm going to do is just go front to back on this and talk about what was done before I bought the bike, what I've done to the bike since, and my thoughts on just about every part involved on the motorcycle. So I hope you can hang with me here. So that being said, let's start off at the front, and while we're talking about the front, let's talk about the rear. The DR650 is a dual sport motorcycle, and as such, it's made for all kinds of environments. One thing I find a little strange is the designation of tires being 50-50, 80-20, 60-40, all of that kind of stuff. And I'll throw my opinion out here. These are obviously pretty knobby tires, and there are 3,000 miles on them. They have been all but maybe 100 miles on Texas chip sealed and chip sealed highways, which just knob gobblers eating them up. The 100 miles was in soft sand off-road. So do you pick a tire that is 90% road because you're going to ride it 90% road? My opinion is that you should pick a tire that is suitable for the worst condition you're going to be in. Prior to this, I was leaving Florida and went up the East Coast, wandered across the northern states. I knew I was going to be on all pavement. I knew I was never going to go off-road at all during this one life of the tire. So I picked a street tire. But again, this was, considered a 50-50 tire. It doesn't really matter what the designation is. You need to have a tire that prepares you for the worst thing you're going to get into. When I took the trip up the East Coast, I knew that I was not going to ride off-road at all, and I was limited to that. If you lived at a house that had a half a mile of mud into your house and the rest of it was all on the highway going to work, you'd still need something that was going to keep you from falling down, breaking your leg in that one portion. So I guess my thought here is to pick the tire for the worst condition you're going to be in during the life of that tire. So with that being said, we need to take a look at the most common tires chosen for this bike. If you go to the forums, it's a great thing to do, read it, and you're going to get arguments about this, but predominantly there are two sets of tires that seem to dominate the choices right now. Shinko 705s are 50-50, 60-40, whatever you call it. Aggressive street tire maybe. They're cheap and they last a good amount of time. I would not use them for anything seriously off-road at all, and I'm no great off-road rider. The other choice that seems to be most prevalent is a combination of the Dunlop 606 on the rear and the Pirelli MT21 on the front. These last pretty well. The Dunlop eats itself up in a hurry, and the Pirelli on road has an extremely weird wear pattern. I've had this on every single one I've had, and we ride 2,500 to 3,000 miles a month, so I go through a lot of tires. This set is the Tusk D-Sport. It's a new one on the market. Some people are liking it, some people are not. The main reason they don't seem to be liking it is the sidewall is extremely hard. The rubber is very hard, and they're a pain in the rear to mount. But that being said, if you lower the pressure on them, and I'm running 24 in the rear, 22 in the front, which is down from Suzuki's recommendation, they do flex enough then to grab fairly well in the corners, and they still seem to be wearing pretty well. Like I say, these are 3,000 miles. There's a couple thousand miles left on each of them. I generally have to change tires early because I have to find a friend and have them shipped there, and so I can't wait till we're just running on the threads. So anyway, that's what I got to say about tires. This bike came when I bought it at 5,000 miles with Racetech emulators in the forks, and they seem to work very well, as does the rear suspension, which is also Racetech. But I can't really give you an honest improvement situation because I never rode a stock one. They seem to work fine, and for me, not as discerning as somebody that really rides a lot of dirt, they're just fine with me. Moving on up to the front fender, we start to get a look at Suzuki's plastic, and this is something I like a great deal. The majority of motorcycles out there that have any kind of fairing are ABS, and ABS is very, very brittle, easy to crack. These bikes are going to get dropped. These fenders are so flexible and bend all over the place. Now, the problem there, though, is if you install one of these tank bags or fender bags, when it pulls it apart, it dives the nose down, and I find I can't tighten this up a lot. The other thing is I really can't put anything in it because if you'll notice, I raise it much and it's going to start to block the headlight. But the plastics I love. Fender bag I'm probably not going to be able to use. We'll just go on from there. Next thing I added was a Parabellum windscreen. People will generally say that the DR, is way better off-road than a KLR, but the KLR has the wind protection, has a better seat, blah 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 blah. It's easily changed. For about $300 or $400, I've got the Parabellum windshield. I'll show you my seat concept seat. It's made a whole new bike out of it. I routinely do 300 to 600 mile days. I've done 800-900. It's not a big deal. Later on we'll talk about the gearing and how that's helped as well. The flexibility of the plastics carries on over to the hand guards. I don't know how much protection they are, although I had one come off, and having my hand beat by thorns for about half an hour was no fun whatsoever. So they do some good. They're not the strongest, but they are flexible. However, it does allow your clutch handle to fall down in the dirt, and I've had 2 drops with this bike that both times broke my clutch handle right up here at the root. So I've sawn through it most of the way, so that hopefully in the future, if that falls again, I'll break it there. I have a different ride profile than most people in that we live on this bike, and I am frequently no place where anything can get fixed. So I want to minimize the potential failures, and cooling systems are a horrible one. Radiators, I'm certainly glad this is an air-cooled bike, but it does have an oil cooler. We've got a grate on the front and a protection on the side. I will probably go to ProCycle. They have an oil cooler bypass hose that, should you puncture that, you can get past it, and I think that might be an important thing if necessary. But in general, I'm glad this is the only cooling issue here. One of the failure points on any clutch system, which is a cable clutch, is the clutch cable itself. So when I bought a spare and I had the tank off, I simply routed a new clutch cable right next to the old one, so that should I ever have a failure with my clutch cable, I'm just going to change the ends over and keep going. The next thing I added was the service tank. I don't know if you pronounced that right or not, but this is one of the 5.3 gallons. It served me really well. I will say I had this brilliant idea that I was going to paint it and make it white to match everything, and you can see I'm scraping the paint off now because it just bubbles all over the place because they are permeable. I'm going to play around with some pigmented epoxy and maybe solve that. I don't know. The tank is okay. There's another one that people like a lot better, but these are priced right. However, the fuel caps, both the locking one and the original one, it's just horrible. It's almost as though it's a different thread pitch. You'll swear you're stripping that thing out. I generally wet my finger and run a little fuel around it because you're running plastic against plastic and it tends to bind up. As I said, I've got a seat concept seat on here, and it's a seat concept low. I am vertically challenged, and that's one of the nice things about the bike, is it has an 1.5 inch factory lowering option, which we've done, so I can get my feet right down on the ground, which is very, very helpful. And the shape of the seat concept seat works really well. I think that after 30-some thousand miles, the foam may be degrading some, and I've added a little cushion here. I'm not sure if I like it or not. This is something that is just absolutely ridiculous on this motorcycle. To me, it's one of the worst points, in that this is the cover here to get to the crankshaft to turn it to set your valves. Now, fortunately, setting your valves is a lot easier because this is a screw and lock nut system, and when I first got it, I set them once, and I have checked them religiously, and I have never found a reason to change it. But these plugs must be made out of butter or something, and they seize onto the outer thing. And I had bought an aftermarket one and was going to put it on, but apparently I waited too long, and now it's frozen there. So we're going to have to cut some more holes in it and get a cold chisel and try and drive it around in a circle and get it out of there. It's a poor piece, but there is an aftermarket for it, and if you get one, I would recommend putting it in right away. Now, right here is a starter motor, and this is another thing that's very, very bad about the Suzuki. Apparently, they are extremely frugal with their application of grease to the rear end bushing. So a majority of these bikes get this howl. Now they make an aftermarket. I'm going to go ahead and hit the starter and you'll hear it. Sounds like a bunch of geese fighting or something. So I don't know that I'll do something with that right away. They seem to run like that just fine. But again, Pro Cycle, if you want to spend enough money, does have a cap that replaces this back end here, and it has roller bearings in it instead of running in an overly dry bushing and squawking. Down here I've added two things, one of them being a peg lowering bracket. I don't know why these are so high. Even at my height they felt uncomfortably cramped, and this is much better. I'll probably get some wider pegs eventually. And the other thing I added was a center stand. The bike is extremely hard to get up on that center stand without the little kicker bar on the back, and usually takes me two people, while if I just lean the bike towards me and shove a rock under the skid plate, I can rock it up and get either wheel off just easier. So I'm probably going to take that center stand back off. I mean, I'll regret it the minute I do, but I can't see any real solid reason for it. Under the engine, I've added a polymer plastic skid plate here. These are lighter than your aluminum ones. They're really super tough, and apparently if you're going over logs or something, they help you slide over a little bit easier. Hopefully that's the case. And speaking of cases, I noticed that a lot of people add a carbon fiber protective cover over both sides of these cases. I don't worry about it too much because I have the tusk boxes on the back, and none of this touches the ground, tip over. But maybe I'll pay for that, but that's okay. I believe in JB Weld. We'll be fine. The tusk boxes have served me very well. I keep a close eye on the mounting brackets to make sure there are no weld failures or anything, but these things have been through a lot, and with my incompetence on the ground several times, so they seem to be a good addition to the bike. One thing I learned very quickly is get a good chain. I went through a couple cheap ones that I thought I was saving money on, and they just lasted no time at all. Remember, this is a thumper. Regardless of the horsepower, it hits in a different way. So that chain is, continually being bumped a lot harder than it would be in a four-cylinder bike or something. So don't scrimp on your chains. Get good ones. They're well worth it. I know most of you aren't hauling a little dog around or living on a motorcycle, but this box that I made has been invaluable, and we've got 3,000 miles on it now, and I am just really pleased. It keeps Izzy safe. Let's see, general changes to the bike in the beginning. They put they rejetted with the Pro Cycle jets. It's got the Tuktoyaktuk exhaust. I did blow a hole in that exhaust. I rebuilt it from an 18-inch one into a 14-inch one, so it's a little snappy now, but I have no problem. And as far as carburation goes, I mean, I've had this thing at 11,300 doing 75, 80 miles an hour and popping wheelies at the top of a pass. While it may not be optimized fuel burn wise versus a fuel injected bike, it is certainly not an issue. While we're out of the desert now, it's obvious that it's time to give this chain a good cleaning, keep everything out of the O-rings, and keep it running smooth. But one of the things that I absolutely love about this Suzuki DR is these snail adjusters. They make a chain adjustment a 1-minute job, literally. You can loosen up the bolt, the nut on the other side, go click one position on each one. There's one on each side, and the little eccentric pulls it back just the right amount, and you are done. Whether you're changing gearing on the fly, you could change your front sprocket in minutes with this, or simply adjusting the chain. It's always 60-some years of riding. It's always been one of my pet peeve things is chain adjustments. Just a pain in the rear, and I don't know why every bike in the world doesn't have snail adjusters. I had a V-Strom 650, and being a Suzuki, I tell them they should have done it. Anyway, wonderful thing. And we're going to segue from there into a discussion about front sprockets. I want to talk about what I feel was one of the best modifications that I made to the bike. And my thoughts backing up one statement, because it still kind of bothers me. The DR has an extremely high first gear, and a lot of people suggested, you know, going from a 15 tooth to a 14 tooth front sprocket. But I'd always expected that that's going to take something out of my top end. That being said, I am, because of the Himalayan and the years riding that, very, very comfortable sitting at 55 to 65 miles an hour, as long as I've got the punch to go faster. So that was my initial thought. I had watched people go to higher sprockets, both in the Himalayan. People were going to one more tooth, and the bike just simply wouldn't pull it. They weren't going as fast as they used to. And I had a friend with the KLR. And don't get me wrong about the KLR. I think it's a great bike. I kind of prefer the DR by quite a bit, but I love every motorcycle out there. I had a really good friend that rides his KLR, and he put a 16 tooth instead of a 15 tooth front sprocket on his. And we were riding together, and you know, he said he was gonna change back. He was constantly shifting down on hills, and overall could not go as fast. So I put a 14 tooth front sprocket on my DR, and one of the things that was just surprising to me really was that it at that time went faster, in that I said that every time I looked down at the speedometer without paying attention to what I was doing prior to that, with a 15 tooth front sprocket, I'd be running, you know, 55 to 65 miles an hour. When I put the 14 tooth in, I kept glancing down and I'm going, wow, I'm doing 75 and even 80 miles an hour. So I posted this on one of the forums, and one of the person says, well, how could you possibly be going faster with the 14 tooth front sprocket? And the 14 tooth, if you put the bike in fourth gear, it'll be wound up like mad. But with the 14th, it's basically fourth and a half. So they said, is that true? It's really faster. Well, another guy jumped right in and said, yeah, I've done the same thing, and it goes faster. And all I did was agree with that, and somebody jumped in, and the statement was, if you're going 80 with the 14 tooth front sprocket, that engine will be screaming. I said, no, it really won't. They said, you'll blow it up, and you're being irresponsible telling people to do this, blah, 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 blah. And I could see there was no winning an argument of opinion over experience and math. So let me just take a look at some of this, okay? Because I feel that the 14 tooth front sprocket, and I feel this way, and I will tell you why I feel this way, is really the best match. Obviously, when we drop the gear down in first gear, we don't have to slip the clutch as much. It reacts quicker. It pulls off the line better. It does everything better. You get into your top gear sooner, you know, in 35, 40 mile an hour range instead of the 50 mile an hour range, which would seem normal for the 15 tooth front sprocket. But the real difference comes in the horsepower and torque curve and the RPMs. Now, the engine is an over square engine, which means it's a 100 millimeter bore, 82 millimeter stroke. An over square engine is built to wind up, and it's got an 8,000 RPM red line. It may be a thumper, it may be one big piston, but Suzuki knows absolutely what they're doing. And you know, if somebody wants to argue piston speeds and you know, mean compression numbers and things like this, I invite them to go to work for Suzuki. The bike performs well, and it handles well. There are a lot worse things we do. I mean, I had to reuse mine as a generator, running it on the side stand. I'm sure that was not great for it. The amount of people I see lugging their bikes and detonating the hell out of them is far worse than letting a motor spin up. So that I don't agree with. But let's take a look at it. At 70 miles an hour, a 15 tooth front sprocket is turning, I'm looking down at my notes here, 47 RPM. At 70 miles an hour, 14 tooth front sprocket takes it up to 5,035, which is 335 RPM increase at 70. That's not an exceptional increase. It's got an 8,000 RPM red line. And I still try to run it at 55 to 60. At 8,000 RPM, 5371 with the 15-tooth front sprocket, 5754 or 383 RPM increase. I know that just about everybody that's ridden a bike without gear indicators has at one time or another, if you've ridden it for half an hour or more in the gear below your top gear and gone, oops, the engine is not screaming, nor is it about to blow up, nor is it irresponsible to tell somebody this. Now, the next question is, how can it go faster? I'm going to bring up the two charts here for the horsepower and torque on this engine. And you're going to see that putting this thing, what do we say, 5035 to 5764 in the 70 to 80 range is right in the middle of the high power band. I'm not saying you're going to be lugging it otherwise, but what do you do when you want to pass somebody? You shift down. You drop that bike onto its power band. And all I'm saying by this is that it is easier to go faster with a 14-tooth front sprocket than it is with a 15-tooth front sprocket. It's still, at 80 miles an hour, it would take a 39% increase in RPM to hit 8,000 RPM, which takes it well over 100 miles an hour, which I'm not taking the DR up well over 100 miles an hour. I'll tell you 90 something, but no. So just consider that, and I guess I won't recommend it, but it's one of the best performance changes I've made. I know I'm not detonating my engine. I don't ever have to shift down. It does not sound wound out. It is not screaming and about to blow up. So, okay, you can tell I'm a little aggravated about that. But I'll end things there. Try not to be a grumpy old man. It's a good combination. The other thing that's nice is this. I showed the snail adjusters. There are 3 bolts and 4 cover bolts. There's a plastic cover and then 3 bolts that hold the front sprocket on. And with those snail adjustments, it's a 10 or 15 minute change. You can, if you want to run your 15 and your 14 or your 15 and your 16. Now, if you're changing rear sprockets, that's a little bit different, but it's no big deal. So anyway, that's my thoughts on the DR. I hope this points out a few things. It's not the ride report that a lot of people give, but I hope it shows you some of my feelings about it. And I didn't mean to rant on about, but that's me.